The Razee Saga. Part 12. Symphony of Ashes. The hollow council chamber on Sentinel thrummed with the tension of too many voices, too many ships, and too much blood still drying in the abyss. Blue light washed over the faces and forms of those who carried the burden of command, Buck Rivers leaning over the tactical table aboard the Razee II, Isabellavines present from the flagship of the Lost Fleet, Torque of the Cryons stiff and granite-eyed, Senna radiant with the calm of Illyria, the Tartans broad and silent as stone towers. Across them all, the tether flickered in the projection, a line of pale light stretching into impossible depths, humming with the strain of anchors that refused to let go. The Illyrians spoke first, their image rippling like water caught in a bowl of sound. Scientists stood at the core of Sentinel, where the planet still whispered secrets of those who had come before. Their words poured into the council, not as boast, but as revelation. Deep in the harmonic chambers, deeper than even Stephen had touched, they had uncovered a machine. A harmonic engine, seeded long ago, designed for one purpose, to sever. Not to kill, not to burn, but to cut the wound between realities until it could never open again. The chamber hushed, as if even the abyss listened. The implication was a weight dropped into still water. To sever the rift meant no more colossi rising from its throats. No more Harrier swarms folding into real space. No more resonant songs shaking planets into forgetting. It meant the abyss itself cut off, its choirs imprisoned forever in their own endless layers. But it also meant abandoning the war they had begun inside. It meant pulling fleets back while battles still raged, while victories had barely been carved from ruin. It meant retreat, and for some, retreat tasted like betrayal. Torque's granite voice pressed into the silence, low and deliberate. He reminded them of what had already been spent, bastions burned out holding songs at bay, destroyers snapped in folds, marines left behind in corridors that had no exit. The Cryons had built the black hole weapons to erase, not to seal. His people did not believe in cages. They believed in ends. Why spare the abyss when destruction was so close at hand? Senna answered not with volume, but with patience. The abyss was not close to ending. It had no end. Stephen had told them this, and the Illyrian cores had confirmed it. Beneath the citadel stretched shelf upon shelf of sleeping choirs. Hundreds of colossi waiting in scaffolds. Tens of thousands of Harriers dreaming in their shells. To press deeper was to invite annihilation without bottom. To seal the rift was not mercy. It was survival. It was the only victory that would last beyond the next song. The Tartans rumbled in agreement, their fleets too small to imagine endless war. Even they, fierce in battle, preferred a silence that endured to a triumph that cost everything. All eyes turned to Rivers. He bore their weight in silence, as he always did, jaw locked, eyes tracing the tether in the projection as if the pale light might speak if he stared long enough. In his mind's eye, he still saw bastions burning out to hold a hinge, saw marines torn away by folds, saw names etched into casualty rolls thicker than any victory report. He had pressed the war into the abyss because waiting meant death. But now, with Sentinel's revelation, with Stephen's visions, he knew the truth. He could not speak softly. They could not kill silence. But they could cage it. Stephen lifted his head, his body weak but his voice steady with Sentinel's song. He had seen the deeper layers. He had felt the scaffold stretching below. The abyss was not to be conquered. It was a sea without shore. If they stayed, if they pressed, they would be dragged down, and the watchers would rise again in unending chorus. But if the wound could be cut shut, if the tether could be severed, then the abyss would remain where it belonged, apart. The decision crystallized in that moment, heavy as steel. The fleets would turn back. They would fight their way home, through colossi and choirs and all the fury the abyss could muster, and when the last hull crossed the tether, the Illyrian weapon would sing. Sentinel and the anchors would resonate together, harmonics tuned to unmake the bridge. Real space would close its scar. The abyss would be sealed forever. The vote was called, each faction laying down its mark. Cryons voted against, unwilling to give up their dream of total erasure. But they were outnumbered. Tartans, Illyrians, Solarians, humans, the Lost Fleet, all in favor. The tally left no question. The path was chosen. Silence fell across the chamber, not Watcher silence, but the kind born of weary resolve. For the first time in the war, the Alliance would not march forward. It would march home. Rivers ended the session with no flourish, no promise of glory, only the weight of inevitability. The fleets would recall. The anchors would hold. And the abyss would thrash in fury when it understood. On the decks of carriers and destroyers, in the ribs of bastions and the quiet hulls of singularity convoys, the order spread. Turn back. Return to the hinge. Protect the tether until the last ship is through. Prepare to leave the abyss forever. Crewmen whispered the words to themselves as if they could not believe them. Marines tightened straps in silence, already knowing the abyss would not let them go without cost. Engineers pressed hands to bulkheads, promising ships they would bring them home. And in the quiet between heartbeats, every soul understood that going forward had been easier. Going back would be the true trial. In the abyss itself, currents shifted. The roads trembled. The hinge quivered as if sensing its own end. And far below, in the citadel's deep chambers, the chorus stirred. The prey was not pressing deeper. The prey was leaving. The abyss would not allow it. The abyss had no need of breath, yet it inhaled. Petals of the citadel's aperture shivered wide, drawing the silence inward, and with it came the weight of understanding. The prey had turned. Not pressing deeper, not chasing scaffolds, not clawing at the choirs below. They had chosen retreat. The chorus did not rage in human ways. Rage was a color, a pressure, a change of tone. The abyss shifted frequency. Where before it had sung hunger and inevitability, now it vibrated with insult. Prey was meant to be devoured, not to choose. The tether would not be permitted to slip from the chorus's grip. Ribs of slumbering cathedrals flexed. Deep scaffolds lit with low glows as colossi stirred. First one, then another, then a third, harmonic engines the size of mountain chains igniting like dawns within darkness. They uncoiled with the patience of things that had never known haste, their bodies arching into space where geometry fractured under the weight of their presence. These were not soldiers. They were choirs given flesh, each tuned to a different note of silence. The first sang of stillness, of prey ships locked in place until the abyss could fold them apart. Its body stretched with joints that pulsed like frozen hearts, conduits glowing with pale gold. The second sang of forgetting, memory stolen one breath at a time until prey minds unraveled into harmless quiet. Its frame rippled with translucent veins, resonance flowing through them like liquid glass. The third sang of despair, not by thought but by weight, pressing fleets down until metal shrieked and anchors cracked. Its ribs bristled like organ pipes, each tuned to a single crushing tone. Together they rose, three voices that would braid into one rope and pull the hinge shut. Around them, harriers unfurled from their nests like swarms of iron-winged insects. Smaller constructs flickered in and out of fold space, their task not to kill but to weave distraction, to tangle prey walls and snares until the Colossi's song could finish its work. The aperture brightened. Petals folded back, focusing. The chorus opened its throat wider than ever before. From the citadel's deep chambers, decision flowed outward into the abyss. Harriers shifted their patterns, abandoning random harassment in favor of disciplined arcs. Relay vessels lit, their ribs resonating in time with the colossi, amplifying notes that would travel not as beams but as truths across the tether itself. The abyss did not see ships or hulls or flesh. It saw prey strands woven across its throat, threads meant to be cut, threads meant to be forgotten. The Alliance was no longer invaders. They were fugitives, and fugitives were not allowed to keep roads. The first test came quickly. A harrier cluster folded itself into the narrow road Zephyr had once walked. The thread bent, quivered, then snapped back. Patrols flowed along it like watered-down cracks, testing, probing, waiting for weakness. Another cluster curled toward the broad way, setting pickets where the lost fleet had carved its path, the weight of their presence already rewriting geometry. The erratic path spiraled with new turbulence, as if the abyss itself wanted to shake loose the stitchwork Zephyr had left behind. The chorus did not rush. Prey had chosen retreat. Prey would be pursued at the pace of inevitability. Deeper still, more scaffolds stirred. Shapes larger than colossi flexed within their cradles, not yet woken, not yet needed. The abyss was patient. It would not squander its choirs all at once. A handful would suffice to crush the hinge, to sever prey from escape. The rest would wait, their voices held in reserve for the day the seal weakened, for the day silence would pour into real space once more. The citadel's petals pulsed. Light swept across the abyss, and the chorus aligned itself. 3 colossi braced, harriers swarmed, relays sang. The first note gathered, aimed not at prey hulls this time, but at the tether itself. The prey believed they could cut the wound closed. The abyss would show them what it meant to sing against silence. The stratagem aboard the Razee 2 was a storm held inside steel. Reports poured in from the scouts already sweeping the abyss roads, fragments of sensor readings strung together into a picture that needed no embellishment. 3 colossi had woken. Harriers surged in organized waves. Relay ships pulsed in concert, their resonance amplifying across the abyss like a choir tuning before the first crushing note. Rivers stood at the center rail, one hand gripping the steel as if the ship's heartbeat could steady his own. Around him the hollow map shimmered with currents, each road traced in pale light, each hinge trembling at the edges. Anchors throbbed at the far end of the tether, steady for now but bearing strain like mountains braced against avalanches. Every board, every officer, every ship was waiting for the order that would turn decision into motion. Isabella's image hung opposite him, sharp and clear, her presence cutting through static. She did not look rattled, not even with the harrier arcs glowing around her spear's position. The lost fleet had already begun to tighten formation, tempest drawing storms into readiness, arclight's chains coiled like lightning waiting for a strike. She asked nothing. She simply watched the map, her eyes steady, her crews already moving. Stephen leaned into the conduit, pale but unwavering. The connection to Sentinel hummed through his frame, his voice carrying more weight than its frailty suggested. The abyss is closing around the hinge. The colossi are tuned not for us, but for the tether itself. If they reach harmony, the bridge will collapse, and nothing will cross. Senna's hands brushed over the rail, her calm flowing into the chamber. She reminded them of the Illyrian engine, waiting on Sentinel, harmonics already tuned to the anchors. If they could hold long enough, if they could bring the fleets home, the rift would not just be defended, it would be closed forever. But the hinge had to remain open. That was the price of salvation. Torque's deep voice broke through, stone upon stone. The Cryon fleets were already moving to brace the roads. Their bastions would anchor the retreat, their cores tuned to fold resonance back upon the singers. He did not need to add the warning. The price would be high. Some would not return. Rivers let their voices hang for a breath, his eyes fixed on the trembling arc that marked the hinge. He could see the path like a knife edge between storms. To falter was to be unmade. To hesitate was to give the abyss time to align. He drew his decision tight and gave it shape. The order spread like thunder through steel. All fleets to the hinge. Bastions to the fore, layered in tiers, plates overlapped to catch the first note. Warhammers in corridors, broadsides ready to cut open breathing space. Carriers to the rear, wings folded and braced, reserves of firepower to pour into breaches. Zephyr to the roads, stitching seams, guiding convoys along the fragile paths. Isabella's spear to the flanks, carving harriers away before they could collapse the walls. Marines to readiness, dropships prepped to strike relays and siege ships that would try to choke the hinge from within. The fleets shifted as one organism, slow at first, then gathering rhythm, each ship knowing its place not as a suggestion but as a vow. Bastions thundered into motion, their shields locking together into a wall of steel and resonance. Destroyers slipped into protective arcs, tractor snares humming with power. Carriers spread wings and retracted them, a heartbeat before a sprint. Warhammers adjusted vectors, their broadsides aligned to the corridors the bastions would open. Zephyr blurred, vanishing and reappearing across the map, laying stitches across folds that quivered at the edges of collapse. The tether pulsed, brighter for a moment, as if recognizing the resolve of those who defended it. Anchors deepened their note, the hum vibrating through every hull, a reminder that even mountains could sing if the song was deep enough. River's voice carried across the channels, flat and unyielding. The Alliance would not die in someone else's choir. They would carve their way home, and when the last ship crossed the tether, Sentinel would sing its final song and close the wound forever. The crews took the words into their bones. Fear remained, but it was muted by purpose. Engineers touched bulkheads, promising to see them through. Marines checked rifles, their faces calm with the resignation of men who had long ago accepted the cost. Pilots ran hands over controls as if the ships were extensions of their flesh. Then the sensors screamed. The first wave of Harriers appeared, not scattered, not probing, but aligned in disciplined arcs. They flowed like a river down the broad road, thousands of wings folding and unfolding in perfect cadence. Their fire did not come as random lances, but as braided beams, folded and redirected, each shot weaving into the next until it became a net of resonance meant to strangle the bastion wall. The wall met them. Shields flared, tractor snares snapped, resonance folded back, waves bent into arcs that shattered against the Harrier's own flanks. The first collisions shook the abyss like thunder, light scattering across currents, ships flashing with the heat of impact. Harriers fell, their bodies snapping into shards, but more pressed forward, endless in number, relentless in rhythm. At the same time, relays lit across the narrow road, their ribs glowing with the same pale gold as the colossi stirring in the depths. Their harmonics pulsed outward, seeking the tether, amplifying notes the colossi had not yet sung. Zephyr slipped between them, phasing into shadows, stitching seams into impossible places, cutting their voices before they could align. But for every relay silenced, two more lit, and the pressure on the tether grew. Then came the colossi. Their shadows rose on the edge of the map, vast shapes that dwarfed even the bastions, ribs glowing with resonance, throats filling with silence. 3 voices, each tuned to a different note, preparing to braid into one rope strong enough to snap the tether. The abyss inhaled. The fleets braced. The first note fell. The abyss roared without sound. The first note fell, not as a beam of fire but as a weight pressed across every plate, every rib, every memory. The colossi sang together, one voice of stillness, another of forgetting, another of despair. The braid of their song rippled across the tether, seeking to choke the bridge at its root, to tear loose the anchors, to unmake the very path the Alliance had carved. The bastions caught it. 10 giants stood at the fore, their plates overlapped into a lattice of steel and resonance. The note struck, shields blazed, and for an instant every corridor aboard every ship felt like it had been pressed into stillness. Crewmen froze, pilots gasped, engineers dropped tools. Then the bastions answered, their tractor snares latching onto the folds inside the note, bending it back, scattering it into pieces that lost coherence. The braid unraveled. The wave weakened. The wall held. Inside the ships, the cost was measured in blood and sweat. The resonance drove into skulls, scraping away memories, tugging at names. Senna's lullabies hummed through calm channels, soft and steady, keeping panic from finding purchase. Marines muttered their names to themselves like charms. Pilots whispered the cadence of maneuvers. Engineers recited power routings aloud until the words rooted them to the deck. The bastions bore the weight, but the burden ran through every soul. River's order came like a knife cutting the silence. Corridors open. Warhammer's fire. The wall shifted. Between plates, corridors of energy opened, narrow but deadly. Warhammers lit their broadsides, streams of plasma lances flooding the gaps, tearing into Harrier swarms that had been pressing the flanks. Light rippled through the void, explosions flaring like stars born and dying in moments. Harriers fell in waves, their disciplined arcs shredded, their resonance nets collapsing. The space before the wall cleared, but only for breaths. More swarmed forward, endless wings folding into the fight. Isabella's spear cut in from the flank. Arclight uncoiled its storm, chains of lightning leaping across clusters of Harriers, bypassing shields, ripping them apart. Tempest unfolded its veins and birthed storms inside the abyss, spirals of pressure that pulled wings out of formation, scattering them into easy prey for the destroyers at its side. Human ships poured precise fire, snares snapping Harriers mid-fold, twisting their own shots back into their bellies. Isabella's voice was not needed, her fleets moved as if guided by her hand alone, cutting through the chaos with clean geometry. Zephyr blurred at the edge of perception, phasing in and out, stitching seams into the narrow road where relays tried to amplify the Colossi's song. It appeared above one rib, phase fire cutting deep, then vanished into a seam that should not have existed, reappearing behind another, laying stitches that held reality together just long enough for convoys to slip past. Each stitch bled light, each one a fragile door against collapse. The Colossi drew breath again. Their throats glowed with resonance, ribs vibrating in harmonics that shook every hull. The second note gathered, heavier, deeper, aimed not just at the tether but at the bastion wall itself. Stephen's voice cracked through the conduit, ragged but certain. Hold. The note is tuned to despair. It will crush if you let it. Do not let it. The bastions braced. Plates locked tighter, shields thickened, tractor snares humming louder than ever. The note fell, pressing down like gravity magnified, bending hulls, making crews feel their own weight triple, quintuple, impossible to bear. Men dropped to knees, hands pressed into decks. Screams rattled through comms. The wall bent but did not break. Tractor snares caught the note, dragged it sideways, bent despair into angles until it no longer crushed but flowed harmlessly past. The bastions trembled, but still they stood. The alliance surged into the opening. Warhammers drove broadsides into the weakened Colossi, cutting glowing scars into their ribs. Arclight chained lightning into the wounds, widening them. Tempest sent storms into their throats, choking harmonics mid-song. Zephyr marked weak points, its coordinates flowing into fire control boards, turning every shot into a knife aimed at arteries. Tudor's Marines launched. Dropships slammed into one of the relay ships amplifying the Colossi's song. Cutters burned through steel, Marines pouring inside, rifles snapping bursts of fire through corridors that folded and twisted. They planted charges on ribs that pulsed with resonance, detonating with precision. The relay buckled, its song cut short, its harmonics collapsing into silence. The Colossi staggered, their braid faltering. The tether brightened, humming steadier as the anchors deepened their note. The bridge held. For a breath, the abyss reeled. Then it inhaled again. More Harriers poured from folds, more relays lit their ribs, more resonance built in the Colossi's throats. The fight had not been won. It had only begun. Rivers gripped the rail, eyes locked on the hinge. Each breath was a battle. Each corridor held open was a miracle. The path home was still there, but only if they could keep walking. Only if they could keep the wall from breaking. Only if they could outlast the abyss. The second note faded. The third gathered. The war for the hinge was not measured in days or hours. It was measured in heartbeats. And too many had already been spent. The chorus knew the prey should have broken. The first braid had pressed stillness into every hull, the second had buried despair into every mind, and yet the wall endured. The prey were not silent. They shouted back with lightning, storms, folds, and black fire. The relay had collapsed beneath their defiance, one throat silenced by intrusion. The prey had dared to plant charges inside a song. This could not be allowed. The colossi shifted. Their ribs glowed with new light, not aimed at prey holes or walls, but at the bridge itself. The tether quivered in their focus, the song of the anchors standing against the chorus like a mountain against the sea. The third braid gathered, tuned to unravel the very wound, to smooth the scar into healed nothingness, to sever prey from home forever. Relay ships aligned in arcs, amplifying, harmonics pulsing into perfect cadence. Harriers scattered to guard them, folding into flanks, weaving nets that would catch any boarding strike before it landed. The abyss bent to their rhythm. The hinge trembled. The prey would not be destroyed. They would be erased. The colossi sang. On the Razee too, the strategium quaked. The map of the tether rippled, the line dimming, the anchor's hum breaking into ragged stutters. The third note surged through space, not pressing down on ships, not clawing at mines, but reaching straight into the wound. It tried to close the door with the fleet still inside. Stephen's cry tore through the conduit. They are singing at the hinge. They are cutting us away. The anchors wailed in answer, their deep tone shuddering, a mountain groaning under too much weight. One core flickered, its harmonics fraying at the edges. Crew hands bled where they pressed against controls, fighting to steady a song that wanted to break. River's order came sharp, unyielding. Shield the anchors. Keep the tether open. Every bastion, every snare, every fold array, into the wall. The bastions obeyed. Giants shifted, shields re-angled, tractor snares reaching not for harriers or colossi but for the resonance itself. They bent the third note, dragging strands of the braid out of alignment, scattering them across currents. Plates cracked, hulls buckled, alarms screamed. One bastion burned out, its plates blackening, but in death it caught a strand and tore it loose, unraveling the braid before it could finish its cut. The tether brightened again, steadier, but it shook as if it remembered how close it had come to breaking. Isabella's spear surged forward, tempest birthing storms into the relay arcs, arc-light chaining brilliance across harrier formations guarding them. Destroyers poured fire, tractor snares twisting wings mid-fold, snapping nets apart before they could catch. Marines launched into the maelstrom, dropships burning like meteors, smashing into relay hulls. Tudor's squads spilled into corridors, rifles snapping bursts, charges planted with steady hands. Each relay destroyed was another throat silenced, another crack in the chorus. Zephyr flickered in and out, its phasing weaving stitches across the narrow road, its crew carving impossible doors to keep convoys moving. It marked coordinates on the Colossi's ribs, wounds waiting for knives. Warhammers answered, broadsides cutting scars into resonance flesh. The monsters staggered, but still they sang, their voices vast enough to shake the hinge. Senna's calm flowed into the channels, her hum threading through static. She did not command. She steadied. Crews found their names again, hands stopped shaking, engineers remembered which conduit to reroute. Her voice was no louder than a whisper, but it pressed against the abyss like a shield. The third note faltered. The tether held. For the first time, the colossi paused. Their ribs dimmed, their harmonics broken. Harriers hesitated in their arcs. The chorus did not understand hesitation, but it learned the shape of interruption. The prey had stolen a beat. Rivers leaned into the rail, eyes locked on the hinge, voice carrying across the fleet. We are not cut. We are not forgotten. We will get through. The abyss inhaled again. The fight was not over. It had only sharpened. The abyss did not relent. The failure of the third braid only deepened its resolve. Where three colossi had sung, now a fourth stirred from scaffolds, its frame larger than the others, its ribs swollen with harmonic veins. It rose with the patience of glaciers, every movement bending space around it, every conduit glowing as if fed by the silence of an entire layer below. The chorus realigned. For voices now, each tuned to a different chord, each designed not just to cut but to overwhelm. The Harriers shifted again, swarms peeling into disciplined waves that bracketed the Alliance formations. Relay ships spread wide, amplifying harmonics, pulsing light through the void like organ pipes gathering breath. The Abyss prepared its next strike. The bastion wall read it first. Plates vibrated under their feet, alarms flashing as resonance built in the distance. Captains steadied their crews, voices flat with certainty. The giants braced, tractor snares reaching into seams that had not yet opened, preparing to twist a song before it was sung. Rivers gripped the rail as the strategium map lit with red arcs. The fourth Colossus was aligning with the first three, preparing a chord that could fracture the tether in one beat. He gave no order for retreat. There was no retreat left. Only forward. Fire all corridors. Open the abyss. The bastions shifted, their shields angling to create gaps just wide enough. Warhammers answered, broadsides unleashing storms of plasma lances into the void. Destroyers snapped snares, folding Harriers mid-flight and hurling them into each other. Carriers loosed waves of drones and fighters, small as sparks against the abyss but deadly in swarms, cutting down relay escorts, striking at amplifiers. Isabella's spear cut hard at the flank. Tempest unfolded storms that stretched across kilometers, tearing Harrier wings apart, scattering their perfect arcs. Arclight chained lightning across relays, unraveling harmonics before they could join the chord. Zephyr flickered like a ghost, slipping between folds, planting stitches across currents that would have collapsed under the pressure. It marked wounds on the fourth Colossus, its coordinates flashing into the net, arrows drawn against ribs that glowed like suns. The Colossi sang. For voices, braided into one rope of annihilation. The note struck. The tether convulsed, its light dimming, anchors howling as harmonics slammed against them. Hulls across the fleet rattled, plates buckling, lights flickering out. Crews fell to knees as memories flickered, names blurred, despair pressed like lead into bones. One bastion cracked, its shields imploding, resonance tearing through its ribs until it was nothing but shrapnel scattered into currents. But the wall did not fall. The remaining giants held, their snares bending strands, dragging pieces of the note apart. Warhammers drove fire into the wounds Zephyr marked, their broadsides cutting glowing scars across the fourth Colossus. Arclight's lightning chained through the cracks, detonating conduits, silencing half its ribs in a storm of shattered resonance. The monster staggered, its note faltering mid-breath. Tudor's Marines launched again. Dropships slammed into a relay cluster, cutters burning through hulls as resonance shrieked around them. They fought in corridors that twisted and folded, rifles firing into shadows that tried to erase themselves. Charges were set, ribs torn apart, harmonics silenced in bursts of fire. The relays collapsed, their amplification lost, and the braid of four voices unraveled. The tether brightened, anchors steadying, their hum deepening like mountains settling into bedrock. The bridge held. But the price was written in steel and blood. One bastion gone, its crew names already moving into casualty rolls. 3 destroyers burned out, their snares fried, drifting lifeless. Carriers bleeding fighters faster than they could launch. Convoys hit, supply ships gutted by Harriers that had folded through gaps. Still the Alliance pushed forward. River's voice cut through the static, cold and sharp. No hesitation. Hold the hinge. Every breath is one closer to home. The fleets tightened, bastions overlapping shields again, warhammers reloading for another broadside, destroyers dragging broken wings into new arcs. Isabella's spear pressed harder, carving corridors through the flanks. Zephyr stitched seams until its hull glowed, its crew bleeding from ears and noses as they forced phase after phase. Marines boarded again and again, charges set, throats silenced. The abyss screamed, though no ear could hear it. The fourth Colossus reeled, its ribs broken, its harmonics faltering. It tried to retreat into folds, but tractor snares pinned it, warhammers pouring fire into its core. It burst apart in silence, ribs scattering, resonance spilling like liquid light. 3 colossi remained, their voices faltering without the fourth. The Harrier swarms hesitated. The relay arcs dimmed. For the first time, the chorus staggered. The alliance had not just endured. It had struck a wound. Rivers exhaled, his grip on the rail tightening. The path was not clear, not yet, but for the first time, the abyss had been forced to yield. The hinge still trembled, the tether still shook, but the door was not shut. Not today. And not while the fleet still sang back. The void churned with debris. Shattered ribs drifted, still glowing with the last dregs of resonance. Harrier wings folded clumsily around the wreckage of their fallen Colossus, no longer in perfect arcs but in ragged swarms, their harmony broken. The battlefield had shifted. For the first time since the retreat began, the Alliance had not only endured the abyssal song but silenced one of its voices forever. The Razee II Strategium pulsed with the aftermath. Casualty boards updated in grim columns. 1 bastion gone, 3 destroyers crippled, convoys bleeding fuel and air into the currents. Carriers rattled with empty hangars, fighter bays stripped bare. Yet the map still glowed with the hinge ahead, still trembling but alive, its light carried by anchors that hummed with renewed determination. Rivers stood steady, though every bone in him felt the weight of loss. He did not flinch from the reports scrolling past, did not soften the numbers with false comfort. He took them in, turned them into resolve, and drove his voice across the channels. The hinge holds. The way home is not closed. We will drive through. Isabella's spear repositioned along the flanks, her lost fleet moving with surgical precision. Arclight's chains pulsed along the debris fields, detonating lingering Harriers as they tried to regroup. Tempest spun storms into the currents, sweeping shattered drones and broken relay fragments away from the path, clearing corridors for convoys. Her ships moved as if she had choreographed the abyss itself, turning chaos into order one strike at a time. Zephyr darted at the edges, phasing through folds, laying stitches across seams that quivered under the strain. Every stitch bled light into the void, but each one held, keeping narrow roads intact long enough for supply ships and escorts to slip through. Its coordinates painted weak points on the remaining colossi, sending them into fire control boards aboard warhammers and destroyers. The bastions braced again, 9 giants forming the wall, shields locking into a single fortress. Their tractor snares hummed, reaching into the resonance of the surviving colossi, tugging at strands of their next song before it could be sung. Their plates glowed with heat, buzzing with harmonics, but the wall did not bend. Tudor's marines prepared for another strike. Dropships reloaded, charges rearmed, squads reviewing the patterns of relay ships already destroyed. They knew the cost. They knew they might not return. Still they strapped in, still they pressed palms to hulls, still they whispered names into helmets so the abyss could not steal them. The surviving colossi drew breath. Their ribs glowed, their harmonics deepened. 3 voices remained, and though they had lost their fourth, they realigned, retuned, preparing a new braid. Not despair this time. Not stillness. Something sharper, aimed directly at the bastion wall, meant to split it from within. Rivers saw it on the map, the arcs converging, the resonance building. He ordered corridors opened again, not as offense but as counterpoint, fire breaking against the braid before it could align. Warhammers poured light through the gaps, broadsides slamming into glowing ribs. Destroyers snapped snares across currents, twisting strands of the braid away. Carriers loosed their last fighters in desperate waves, swarming relays and Harriers alike, cutting amplification before it could fuse. The braid struck, jagged, incomplete. It slammed against the wall, shields flaring, plates cracking, alarms screaming across decks. The bastions groaned, one giant nearly buckling under the weight. Its crew fought with bloodied hands, forcing power into broken conduits, welding plates shut even as they glowed white with heat. The braid tore into them, but it did not break them. The hinge glowed brighter, as if heartened by their defiance. Anchors deepened their note, the hum rolling through every hull, steadying hearts and minds alike. The tether remained intact, trembling but uncut. Senna's voice drifted across the channels, calm as a river. Hold. The silence is not stronger than you. Remember who you are. Remember where you are going. Her lullaby carried into helmets, into control boards, into engines that burned hotter with every word. Crews steadied, panic bleeding away, focus sharpening. The Marines launched again. Dropships streaked into the void, weaving through Harrier fire, slamming into relay hulls. Tudor led from the front, his blade cutting resonance ribs, his squads planting charges with ruthless precision. Explosions rippled through relays, their harmonics collapsing into silence. The braid weakened further, its strands unraveling. The Alliance pressed the advantage. Warhammers hammered deeper, Arclight's chains ran wild, tempest storms engulfed wings. Zephyr stitched and marked, turning every scar into a target. The bastion wall shifted forward, not just holding but advancing, shields driving the Colossi back. The abyss reeled again. For the first time in the war, the Alliance was not only surviving. It was winning ground. Rivers stood tall at the rail, his eyes locked on the hinge glowing ahead. They had silenced one Colossus. They had broken the braid of three. The path was opening, inch by inch, heart by heart. But he knew the abyss would not stop. It never stopped. More scaffolds waited below, more voices waited to sing. They were not out yet. The hinge still trembled. The tether still strained. The war was not over. But for now, for this heartbeat, the Alliance moved forward. The abyss refused surrender. The loss of one Colossus, the unraveling of a braid, the silence of its relays, these were not defeats, only adjustments. Silence had no pride, only persistence. Where one voice was cut, another waited. Where one choir faltered, a deeper one stirred. The citadel's petals widened. The chorus inhaled. From scaffolds further below, more colossi flexed, their ribs glowing with the pale light of dormant harmonics awakening. Not one, not two, but 5. Smaller than the first leviathans, yet faster, their frames tuned for sharper chords, their voices meant not to crush but to cut. They rose together, a quintet of blades in song, their harmonics weaving into a lattice designed to slice through bastion shields like glass under diamond. Around them, harriers surged again, wings folding into perfect arcs, their formations disciplined once more. Relay ships glowed, harmonics amplifying the quintet, shaping their voices into a single spear. The abyss had learned. This would not be a roar meant to overwhelm. This would be a scalpel meant to pierce. The tether trembled. The hinge quivered. The abyss prepared to strike. On the Razee 2, alarms flared red. Sensor feeds lit with new signatures, 5 colossi rising from deeper currents, their harmonics sharpening like blades being drawn. The map painted arcs of their alignment, a lattice forming across the path to the hinge. They were not coming to crush. They were coming to sever. Rivers gripped the rail, eyes narrowing as the lattice grew clearer. The bastions could hold against weight. They could absorb despair, scatter stillness, bend a rope of annihilation. But against a lattice tuned to pierce, no shield would be enough. The wall could break in a single cut. Isabella's image appeared at his side, her expression hard. Her spear was already repositioning, Arclight and Tempest moving to intercept the quintet, destroyers tightening into escort arcs. She knew as well as he did, if the lattice struck the bastion wall, the retreat would end here. Zephyr flickered across the map, phasing through seams, marking coordinates on the quintet's ribs. Its crew strained, their hull glowing with stress fractures, but still they stitched, still they marked. Every weak point was fed into fire control boards, turning chaos into a plan. The bastions braced, tractor snares humming, shields locking tighter than ever. They knew they could not stop the lattice alone. They could only hold it long enough for others to strike. Rivers gave the order. Strike before they sing. Warhammers roared, broadsides flooding the void with plasma lances. Carriers loosed their last drones, swarming in desperate waves, their tiny weapons striking at relay ships, tearing amplifiers apart. Destroyers snapped snares across currents, twisting Harrier arcs, dragging them into collisions. Isabella's spear hit the flank. Arclight's chains leapt across the quintet, lightning snapping into glowing ribs, disrupting harmonics before they could align. Tempest birthed storms that swallowed relay clusters, scattering their amplification into useless noise. The lost fleet carved through Harriers, each kill another cut in the net. The quintet staggered but did not fall. Their ribs glowed brighter, their harmonics pulsing harder. The lattice formed, strands weaving into a spear of resonance aimed directly at the bastion wall. Stephen's voice cracked through the conduit, raw and certain. The spear is tuned to pierce. If it strikes, the wall will split. You must break its rhythm before it lands. Tudor's Marines launched. Dropships streaked into the void, weaving through Harrier fire, slamming into relay hulls. Squads poured out, rifles firing in bursts, charges planted on resonance ribs. Explosions tore through amplifiers, harmonics collapsing mid-pulse. 3 relays silenced, 2 more flickering. The spear's edge dulled, but still it gathered. The quintet sang. The lattice struck the wall. Shields flared, plates cracked, alarms shrieked. One bastion split down its center, its shields pierced, its core burning out in an instant. Another buckled, ribs tearing apart, its crew ripped into the abyss with it. The wall bent, nearly breaking. But the strike did not finish. The relays silenced by Marines left the lattice incomplete, its edge jagged, its thrust shallow. The bastion staggered but held. The wall did not fall. Warhammers poured fire into the quintet, broadsides ripping glowing scars across their ribs. Arclight's chains struck again, detonating conduits, breaking harmonics mid-song. Tempest storms engulfed one of the Colossi, tearing it apart piece by piece until its song collapsed into silence. Zephyr's stitches held the seams long enough for convoys to slip past, their hulls glowing as they brushed the edges of collapse. For Colossi remained, but their lattice was broken. The spear was dulled. The tether brightened again, anchors humming louder, their song rolling through every hull. The hinge glowed ahead, trembling but intact. The path home was still open. Rivers stood tall at the rail, his voice cutting across the channels. The abyss will not cut us down. We will reach the hinge. Hold the wall. Strike their throats. The fleets answered with fire, storm, and steel. The retreat pressed on. The wall still stood, but the cost was etched into every deck, every breath, every scar of steel. Inside the bastions, corridors groaned under stress that would never leave them. Plates hummed at frequencies that could not be tuned out, a reminder of the lattice that had split one of their brothers apart. Crews staggered through dim red light, hands raw from clutching controls, eyes bloodshot from the strain of holding resonance at bay. Engineers welded glowing seams with trembling fingers, praying the patch would hold through the next song. Some collapsed where they stood, dragged back to their stations with no time for rest. On destroyers, snares burned hot enough to fry boards, sparks leaping across consoles. Captains barked rhythms not to command but to keep their crews awake, voices hoarse, throats bleeding from hours of shouting. Marines doubled as engineers, hauling power couplings into place while still armored for boarding actions, sweat pouring down their backs inside suits that stank of ozone and blood. Carriers rattled hollow, hangar bays stripped bare, fighters gone, drones reduced to smoldering fragments adrift in the abyss. Pilots sat in silence, helmets in hands, knowing there would be no replacements, no fresh wings to launch. Deck crews scrubbed blood from scorched plating, their faces gray with exhaustion. Yet still the carriers moved, still their engines burned, still they kept place in the wall. The convoys bore scars deeper than steel. Supply ships limped with holes that no weld could close, cargo lost to currents, survivors clinging to what remained. Crews whispered to each other in corridors lit by failing lights, promising home even as they doubted it. Every breath was rationed, every drop of water counted, yet none turned from the path. To fall behind was to be lost forever, and so they pressed forward, step by step, engine by engine. Even Zephyr bore wounds. Its hull flickered with stress fractures, its crew bleeding from ears and noses after each phase. Yet they kept stitching seams, kept weaving paths that should not exist, kept marking wounds on Colossi ribs. They knew they would not survive if they stopped, and so they did not stop. On the Razee too, Rivers stood at the rail, his face carved in stone. He did not speak of the dead. He did not speak of the lost bastions or crippled carriers. He carried them in silence, and his silence was enough. His crews looked at him and knew they could not falter, because he did not. Isabella's spear showed no hesitation, though every ship carried scars. Tempest's veins glowed with damage, storms weaker but still deadly. Arclight's chains sparked, lightning sluggish, yet each strike still found its mark. Her destroyers flew with holes through their hulls, but they flew. She gave no speech, no promise of survival. She simply moved, and her fleets moved with her. Tudor's Marines counted their losses in empty racks, names missing from squads, faces burned into memory. They did not stop boarding. Dropships still launched, still slammed into relay hulls, still poured rifles and charges into resonance corridors. They knew each launch might be the last, but hesitation was not a word in their language. Senna's lullabies filled the channels, her voice soft, steady, wrapping around the edges of fear. She did not heal wounds. She reminded crews that they still existed, that their names still mattered, that silence had not erased them. Her calm carried through static, through screams, through the endless roar of the abyss. It was a shield no enemy could see, but without it, they would have broken long ago. Stephen pressed against the conduit, his body failing but his voice strong. Through Sentinel, he whispered truths no one else could see, where the folds thinned, where seams would hold, where the tether trembled weakest. Blood streaked his face, but still he spoke, and still the fleet lived by his visions. The toll was written everywhere, in bodies and steel, in names and silence. Yet none turned back. None faltered. The hinge glowed ahead, trembling but open. Home waited, if they could survive the last gauntlet. The abyss did not wait. From the citadel's petals, the chorus gathered again. 3 colossi remained, their ribs glowing with pale fire. Harriers surged, their arcs tighter than ever, their discipline sharpened by fury. Relay ships pulsed with renewed light, harmonics rising into a fresh braid. This time not to pierce, not to crush, but to drown. The abyss would wash over the fleets like a tide, not cutting, not striking, but erasing with sheer weight. The strategium lit with warnings. The map showed the swell building, a wall of resonance ready to collapse across every ship at once. No corridor could block it. No shield could turn it aside. To survive, they would have to outrun it. Rivers' voice cut across the channels, steady as ever. Push forward. Every engine, every thruster, every fold array, into the hinge. The bastions will hold the tide. The fleets will move. The wall tightened, bastions braced, shields glowing. Warhammers surged into corridors, broadsides ready. Carriers strained engines, dragging convoys with tractor beams. Zephyr darted ahead, stitching seams into impossible roads. Isabella's spear flanked the tide, carving into harriers before they could collapse the path. Marines launched once more, striking at relays feeding the swell. The abyss roared. The tide fell. The hinge trembled. The tether shook. And the alliance raced for home. The swell was building. Relay ships pulsed with pale light, ribs glowing as harmonics climbed toward their peak. The Colossi stood behind them like mountains waiting for the tide to break, their throats opening, their voices ready to ride the flood. Harriers swirled in arcs above, weaving nets to protect the relays. The Abyss had learned. To drown the Alliance, it needed its amplifiers intact. Tudor's voice carried through the channels, flat and certain. The relays fall first. Dropships launched from bays scorched and battered, their frames trembling under acceleration. Marines strapped into harnesses, rifles locked, charges primed. They knew the cost. They knew how many had not returned from relay corridors before. Still they pressed their palms against hulls and whispered names they would not forget. The dropship streaked into the void, weaving through Harrier fire, shields flaring, engines screaming. Some fell before they reached their marks, ripped apart by resonance lances, crews swallowed by silence. Others slammed hard into relay hulls, cutters burning through ribs, marines spilling into corridors that folded and twisted around them. The fight inside was a nightmare of sound and distortion. Walls pulsed with resonance, harmonics thrumming through every plate, threatening to unmake memory and thought. Marines forced their way forward, rifles snapping bursts into constructs that flickered in and out of phase. Grenades detonated in folds, explosions tearing holes in reality that sealed again seconds later. Squads split, charges planted on ribs glowing with amplification. Tudor led the way, his blade cutting through resonance beams, his voice steady, pulling squads forward. He marked ribs that hummed too brightly, weak points in the harmony, and charges were laid with precision. Explosions tore through the relay's core, light flaring as amplification collapsed. One relay silenced, its harmonics shattering. But there were more. Another dropship slammed into a second relay, marines flooding inside, their rifles chattering through corridors that bent and stretched. They fought through Harrier drones released within, their armor shredded by resonance bursts, but still they pressed forward. Charges planted, detonations rippling. The relay cracked apart, ribs snapping, its glow extinguished. A third fell, then a fourth. The swell dimmed, its rhythm faltering. The price was blood. Half the dropships did not return, torn apart in the void, crews lost to silence. Inside the relays, squads were shredded, names struck from rosters. Tudor himself staggered from the last relay, his armor scorched, his blade cracked, but his voice still steady. For relays silenced. The tide blunted. The fleets pressed forward. The bastion wall braced, shields glowing white under strain. Warhammers surged through corridors, broadsides cutting into Harrier arcs. Carriers dragged convoys with tractor beams, engines burning hot, crews praying systems would hold. Zephyr darted ahead, stitching seams into roads that flickered like mirages, pulling ships through folds that wanted to collapse. Isabella's spear cut the flank again. Arclight's chains leapt across Harrier wings, detonating dozens in a single strike. Tempest birthed storms that swept drones into spirals, tearing them apart. Her destroyers fired in precise bursts, snares dragging Harriers out of formation, unraveling their nets. The spear cleared a path, carving space for the convoys to move. The Colossi sang, their voices riding the swell. But with the relays silenced, the tide lost strength. The wave still struck, pressing against shields, rattling hulls, bending seams. Crews screamed as memories blurred, despair pressed into their bones, names slipped from minds. Senna's voice flowed across the channels, soft and steady, pulling them back, reminding them who they were, where they were going. Her lullabies steadied hands, calmed hearts, restored names to tongues. The bastions caught the tide. Shields flared, plates cracked, but tractor snares dragged strands of resonance out of alignment, scattering the wave. One bastion burned out, its plates shattering, its hull torn apart. Another staggered, its shields collapsing, but still it stood, still it held. The wall bent but did not break. The fleets surged forward through the opening. Convoys slipped past, carriers dragging them with every ounce of power. Warhammers poured fire into Colossi ribs, carving scars deeper, forcing them back step by step. Zephyr flickered ahead, stitching seams that trembled on the edge of collapse. Isabella's spear cut deeper, storms and chains tearing harriers apart, her fleets moving with relentless precision. The swell broke. The tide collapsed. The colossi staggered, their harmonics faltering. The abyss reeled. The hinge glowed ahead, closer now, trembling but open. The tether hummed with strain, but it held. The path home was still there. Rivers stood tall at the rail, his voice cutting across the channels, sharp and unyielding. The tide is broken. The hinge awaits. Push through. The fleets answered with fire, storm, and steel. The chorus did not understand loss as prey did. To silence a relay, to break a colossus, to blunt a tide, these were not defeats. They were notes cut short in a song without end. The abyss had no end. The prey could not imagine what slept below, or how much silence was still left awake. The citadel opened wider. Petals unfurled into arcs that curved beyond sight, drawing silence from depths the fleets had not yet glimpsed. From scaffolds buried in currents where light could not cling, something larger stirred. It rose slow, deliberate, every rib glowing with resonance older than the stars. Larger than colossi, longer than bastions, its frame twisted like a cathedral stretched into infinity. Where Leviathan had been hunger and the resonance cathedrals had been choirs, this was both at once. It carried 1,000 throats along its body, each tuned to a different chord, a living arsenal of silence. The chorus had given it a name before prey had learned to speak. Dirge. Dirge rose from the abyss, unfolding with patience, every movement bending reality, every conduit spilling light into currents that shook the hinge itself. It was not sent to hold. It was sent to end. Relay ships aligned in reverent arcs around it, amplifiers thrumming in rhythm. Harrier wings swirled like attendants, their arcs perfect, their nets unbroken. The abyss had chosen to end the retreat here, with one voice that could drown all others. Dirge sang. Its first note was not directed at shields or anchors. It reached into the tether itself, not to cut but to consume. The bridge flickered, its light dimming, anchors groaning under strain. Every hull shuddered as the resonance pressed into seams, trying to devour the path itself, to erase the road home not with a slice but with a swallow. The chorus knew the prey had grown bold. It would break their boldness. The hinge would collapse. Silence would claim what had slipped too far. On the Razee 2, the strategium shook as the note hit. The tether dimmed to a thread, the anchor's hum faltering, the hinge flickering like a candle in wind. Stephen screamed, his voice tearing through the conduit, blood streaming down his face. This is not a choir. This is something older. If it feeds, the road will be gone. Rivers gripped the rail, his jaw locked, eyes fixed on the hinge fading on the map. This was not a braid, not a tide. This was an ending. Dirge had risen to devour everything they had fought for. Isabella's spear already moved. Arclight's chains snapped across harrier wings, detonating arcs before they could tighten. Tempest birthed storms larger than ever, entire swaths of the void twisting into hurricanes that swallowed drones and relays alike. Her destroyers cut precise fire into Dirge's attendants, tearing gaps in its perfect escort. The bastions braced. Their shields locked tighter, tractor snares humming so loud they shook the decks. They pushed power until conduits glowed white, until crews collapsed at their stations, until their ribs groaned like mountains ready to split. They had held against despair, against tides, against lattices meant to pierce. Now they braced to hold against consumption itself. Zephyr flickered into seams, its hull shaking, its crew bleeding, but still it stitched. Its coordinates marked weak points along Dirge's frame, ribs that glowed too brightly, conduits overloaded with resonance. Every stitch was a plea for warhammers to strike before the abyss swallowed them whole. Warhammers answered, broadsides unleashing storms of plasma lances, carving into glowing ribs. Some strikes cut deep, detonating conduits, but most bent away, resonance swallowing fire into silence. Dirge's body absorbed attacks, its thousand throats singing louder, its song growing stronger. Tudor's marines launched again, dropships streaking toward relay ships amplifying Dirge's song. They fought through Harrier nets, slammed into ribs, cut through corridors shaking with resonance. Charges planted, detonations rippling, amplifiers silenced one by one. But for each that fell, Dirge sang louder, its thousand throats weaving harmonics without need of amplification. The tether dimmed further. The hinge quivered on the edge of collapse. Anchors screamed, their hum fractured, their cores burning. One anchor buckled, its song faltering, its crew consumed by the resonance. The tether thinned, barely holding, a thread stretched across eternity. River's voice cut across the channels, cold and sharp. Every weapon on Dirge. Strike its throats. Do not let it feed. The fleets obeyed. Warhammers poured fire, bastions braced, Zephyr stitched, Isabella's spear carved, marines silenced relays. Every ship, every weapon, every soul turned against Dirge. But Dirge still sang, and the tether still dimmed. The hinge was slipping away. The stratagem of the Razee II had become a storm of sound and light, a council chamber carried on the edge of collapse. Every voice that mattered flickered in through hollow, faces strained, eyes lit by the glow of Dirge's rising song. The deck shook with each pulse. The tether dimmed in the projection, its pale line reduced to a thread. Torque spoke first, stone breaking under pressure. Dirge is not another Colossus. It is not a choir. It is the abyss itself carried into a frame. He demanded the weapon be fired now, before the hinge collapsed, before the fleet was swallowed whole. To delay was to invite annihilation. Senna shook her head, calm even as alarms screamed around her. The engine was not yet ready. The harmonic cores on Sentinel were still aligning, the anchors still tuning. To fire early would risk failure. A failed severing would doom them all, leaving nothing but a broken tether and the abyss pouring into real space unchecked. The Tartans rumbled, their voices low but insistent. They had lost too many already. Bastions burned, marines gone, convoys shredded. They demanded certainty, not hesitation. If the weapon could not be trusted, then they must pour every shot into Dirge and tear it apart, even if it cost every ship in the abyss. Stephen leaned into the conduit, his face pale, blood dripping from his nose, his voice ragged. Dirge cannot be killed. It is not a throat. It is not a body. It is 1,000 voices tuned into one endless note. Strike it, and it will return. Seal the wound, and it will be trapped forever. But you must hold. You must not falter. The engine will work, but only if the tether survives until the last ship is through. Silence fell across the council, silence broken only by alarms and the low groan of anchors fighting for life. The decision was not made in votes. It was made in resolve. They would not fire early. They would hold, no matter the cost, until the fleets crossed the hinge. Then and only then would the Illyrian weapon sing. Rivers ended the chatter with one sentence. Hold the line. Buy the time. Make the choice worth something. The battle roared back into focus. Dirge sang, its 1,000 throats weaving harmonics that reached into every hull. Lights flickered, power conduits screamed, crews fell to knees as despair pressed into their bones. The tether dimmed further, the hinge quivering as if one more pulse would erase it. The bastions locked shields, tractor snares burning white, pulling strands of resonance apart strand by strand. One giant cracked, plates peeling, crews screaming as the resonance tore through decks, but still it stood, still it held. Another braced at its side, shields flaring, ribs glowing as its core pushed past safe limits. They were dying, but they would not break. Warhammers fired until their barrels glowed white, broadsides slamming into Dirge's ribs. Each shot carved shallow scars, conduits bursting, but for every wound inflicted, Dirge's song grew louder. Plasma lances vanished into silence, detonations swallowed by harmonics. Zephyr flickered across seams, its crew bleeding, its hull fractured, but still it stitched. It marked throats that hummed too bright, coordinates fed into every fire control board. Each mark became a wound, each wound became a scar. Zephyr bled light, but still it moved, still it stitched, still it fought. Isabella's spear cut along Dirge's flank. Arclight chained lightning across its throats, detonating some, silencing harmonics for precious breaths. Tempest birthed storms that wrapped around its ribs, pulling Harriers into spirals, scattering escorts. Her destroyers fired into marked coordinates, carving deeper wounds. The lost fleet moved with precision, each strike timed, each storm placed, every shot part of a single plan. Tudor's Marines launched again, dropships streaking into void. They did not aim for Dirge's body. They struck at the relay cluster feeding its song. Dropships slammed into ribs, squads pouring inside, rifles firing in short bursts, charges planted on throats that pulsed with amplification. Explosions flared, relays collapsing, harmonics cracking. Dirge faltered for a breath, its song dimming, the tether brightening. But Dirge did not fall. It sang louder, every throat igniting, every harmonic weaving tighter. Its voice pressed into the tether, consuming the thread, trying to erase the road home. Anchors groaned, one buckling, its hum breaking into silence. The tether dimmed again, a heartbeat from collapse. Rivers gripped the rail, his eyes fixed on the hinge trembling in the projection. The decision had been made. They would not fire early. They would hold. Every ship, every crew, every soul would fight until the last had crossed. Only then would the weapon sing. Dirge sang again, and the abyss shook. The alliance braced, and the hinge still glowed. Dirge's voice became the battlefield itself. It was no longer a note heard but a weight felt, pressing through steel, bone, and thought. Hulls rattled under harmonics that wanted to unmake them, decks shook as though the ships were being chewed by an invisible maw. The tether dimmed, the hinge trembling with every pulse. The bastions bore the brunt, their shields flaring so bright they glowed like suns in the abyss. One giant split open, its ribs torn apart, its core collapsing into silence. Another staggered, half its plates gone, yet still its crew forced power into snares, dragging strands of resonance apart even as the decks burned around them. 8 remained, then 7, then 6. The wall bent but it did not collapse. Warhammers bled fire, broadsides lighting the void with storms of plasma lances. Each strike carved new scars into Dirge's body, tearing open conduits, silencing throats for moments at a time. But for every scar inflicted, Dirge grew louder, its 1,000 voices weaving tighter. Fire was swallowed, detonations absorbed into resonance. Still the warhammers fired, even as their barrels glowed white, even as engineers patched with bare hands and scorched tools. Zephyr flickered in and out of seams, its hull trembling, its crew bleeding from eyes and ears. It stitched reality where it wanted to unravel, keeping roads intact, marking glowing throats on Dirge's frame. Each mark became a wound when Warhammer struck, each wound another heartbeat stolen from the abyss. The crew whispered their names to one another between phases, promises that they would not be forgotten if the next stitch was their last. Isabella's spear struck again and again. Arclight's chains leapt across Dirge's ribs, lightning detonating throats, silencing harmonics in bursts of fire. Tempest birthed storms so vast they swallowed escorts whole, Harriers torn apart inside their spirals, their nets collapsing. Her destroyers poured fire into seams Zephyr marked, precision strikes cutting into resonance arteries. Her ships bled and broke, but still they moved, still they carved, still they struck. Tudor's Marines boarded again, their dropships burning through Harrier fire, slamming into relay ships that fed Dirge's song. They cut through corridors shaking with resonance, rifles firing into drones that flickered in and out of phase. Charges were planted, detonations rippled, amplifiers collapsed. With every relay destroyed, dirge faltered, its harmonics breaking, the tether brightening. But each squad paid the price in blood. Few returned. Tudor staggered back from the last relay, his armor blackened, his blade chipped, but his eyes unbroken. The hinge glowed brighter for a breath, the tether stabilizing. But dirge still sang. Its thousand throats wove tighter, harmonics pulling at reality itself. The tether quivered again, dimming to a thread. Anchors screamed, their hum fractured, their cores burning white-hot. One collapsed, its song silenced forever, its crew consumed in fire. The Razee too shuddered as dirge's note pressed through it, console sparking, lights flickering out. Rivers stood unshaken, his hand gripping the rail, his eyes locked on the hinge. He knew what this was. Not a battle to win, but a battle to survive. Every heartbeat stolen from dirge's song was another step closer to home. He gave the only order that mattered. Hold. Far above, on Sentinel, the Illyrians worked in silence broken only by the low hum of the harmonic engine. Cores glowed within chambers carved by those who had come before, resonance pulsing in time with the anchors. The machine was not built for destruction. It was built for severing, to cut the wound between worlds, to seal the tether forever. Scientists moved between consoles, their faces pale in the glow. Readings scrolled across crystal panes, harmonics aligning, patterns tightening. Every pulse of dirge's song shook the chambers, every flicker of the tether rattled the machine. If the hinge collapsed before the engine fired, the seal would fail, and the abyss would spill into real space unchecked. Senna stood at the core, her voice a steady hum woven into the machine itself. She lent her calm to the harmonics, smoothing them, steadying them, keeping the cores aligned. Sweat poured down her face, her hands trembled, but still she sang, still she steadied, still she held. Stephen's voice carried from the conduit, weak but certain. They are almost ready. Hold the hinge. Do not falter. The song of silence will end. The engine glowed brighter, its harmonics rising, its voice preparing to meet the abyss. On Sentinel, the chamber of the harmonic engine glowed with a light that was not fire but resonance made visible. The cores pulsed in rhythm, each a sphere of contained song, their frequencies aligning into a single, growing chord. Illyrian scientists moved between them, robes scorched, hands trembling, every console alive with streams of harmonics. They had no more time to measure. The abyss was already pressing through the tether, already trying to swallow the bridge whole. Senna stood at the heart of it, her hum woven into the machine. Her voice steadied the cores, smoothed their jagged pulses, aligned them into coherence. Sweat poured down her face, her body shaking under the strain, but she did not falter. She had become part of the engine, and the engine was becoming the knife that would cut forever. The crystals in the chamber cracked under stress, fractures glowing with pale light. Alarms screamed across Illyrian consoles. The lead scientist cried out that the alignment was not yet complete. To fire now would be to risk failure, and failure meant not just defeat but annihilation. Senna pressed her hands against the core, her hum deepening. Almost. Hold them a little longer. Just a little longer. In the abyss, that little longer was written in blood. Dirge sang with the power of 1,000 throats, its voice pressing into every hull, every seam, every thought. The tether dimmed until it was no more than a line of faint light, quivering on the edge of collapse. Anchors screamed, their cores fracturing, one already gone, another moments from failure. The hinge flickered like a dying flame. Rivers gripped the rail aboard the Razee too, his voice cutting through the static. Hold. Buy them time. The bastions answered. 5 remained, their shields flaring brighter than ever, tractor snares dragging strands of resonance apart with a violence that tore their own ribs in the process. One giant split open, its core burning white, its crew already lost. Another braced harder, its plates glowing with heat, its crew screaming into comms as they forced power into systems past the breaking point. They knew they were not surviving. They knew they were only delaying. But delay was enough. Warhammers fired until barrels melted, broadsides lighting the abyss with desperate fire. Their shots carved shallow scars across Dirge's frame, silencing throats for seconds at a time. Every second was worth lives. Engineers welded glowing seams with bare hands, their voices hoarse from shouting through smoke, their lungs scorched by fire. Still the guns fired, still the scars deepened, still they bought time. Zephyr flickered in and out of folds, its hull fracturing, its crew bleeding, but still it stitched. Roads that should not have existed held open long enough for convoys to slip through. Each stitch weakened the ship further, but each stitch was another heartbeat stolen from Dirge. Its crew whispered their names into comms, promises they would not be erased. They knew some would not see the hinge, but they sowed the road anyway. Isabella's spear carved through Dirge's flank. Arclight's chains leapt across throats, detonating conduits, silencing harmonics for moments at a time. Tempest storms spun into hurricanes, tearing harriers apart, scattering escorts, ripping gaps into perfect arcs. Her fleets moved as if her hand guided every strike, precision born of desperation. They did not aim for victory. They aimed to buy breaths. Tudor's Marines boarded again. Dropships streaked into relay clusters, their hulls burning under Harrier fire. Squads poured into corridors that bent and twisted, rifles snapping bursts, charges planted on amplification throats. Explosions tore through relays, collapsing their harmonics, weakening Dirge's song for heartbeats. Few squads returned, most consumed by silence, but the relays fell, and with them the song dimmed just enough. The hinge flickered brighter, the tether stabilizing for breaths. Stephen's voice cracked through the conduit, raw with blood, his words trembling but clear. They are almost ready. Hold. On Sentinel, the harmonic engine roared. The cores pulsed in unison now, their harmonics aligned into a single, blinding chord. The chamber shook, fractures spreading through crystal supports, consoles sparking. Illyrian scientists shouted, their voices drowned in the hum of the engine. The lead scientist looked at Senna, eyes wide with fear. If they waited longer, the cores would shatter. If they fired too soon, the seal would fail. Senna pressed harder, her hum deepening into a note that shook the chamber. She steadied the harmonics, forcing them into coherence. Her voice cracked, her body trembling, but the engine obeyed. The chord stabilized, its light growing brighter, its resonance reaching for the tether. The weapon was almost ready. In the abyss, Dirge drew breath again. Its thousand throats wove tighter, its song reaching a crescendo. The tether dimmed to a thread. The hinge flickered on the edge of collapse. Anchors screamed, their cores splitting, their hum breaking into static. The bastions braced one final time. For remained, each one burning from within, each one moments from destruction. They knew they would not survive the next note. They knew their sacrifice was the only shield left. They locked shields, their snares burning white, and prepared to meet annihilation head-on. River's voice cut through the static, cold and unyielding. Hold them. One more breath. One more minute. The fleets obeyed. Warhammers fired, Zephyr stitched, Isabella's spear carved, Marines silenced. Every strike, every stitch, every breath was another heartbeat stolen from Dirge, another moment bought for the weapon above. Stephen whispered into the conduit, his voice no louder than a sigh. It is time. On Sentinel, the chamber became a sun. The harmonic cores blazed, their light flooding through crystal ribs, their resonance rising into a chord so pure it shook the foundations of the planet. The Illyrian scientists shielded their eyes, their robes whipping in currents of invisible force. The fractures in the chamber widened, crystal supports cracking, sparks spilling from consoles. The engine had reached its limit. Senna pressed her hands into the core, her hum woven through the machine. Her voice bled raw, her body trembling, her face wet with sweat and tears. She steadied the resonance, held it together, smoothed the jagged edges into harmony. Around her, the machine shifted, its song no longer a rising chord but a knife. The harmonic engine had become the severing note. The signal leapt into the anchors. In the abyss, the anchors blazed brighter than suns. Their hum deepened, their cores resonating with the chord poured into them from Sentinel. The tether pulsed with new life, no longer dim, no longer trembling. Its line sharpened, brighter, steadier, its resonance tuned not to hold but to cut. Dirge sang louder, its thousand throats weaving into a crescendo meant to consume. The abyss pressed harder, its harmonics clawing at the tether, trying to erase it before the severing was complete. The hinge quivered, pulled in both directions. The bastions answered. For giants locked shields, their cores burning hotter than stars, their crews already lost but still holding. Tractor snares snapped strands of resonance, dragging them apart, feeding them into the severing note. Their shields flared white, their plates split, but they did not fall. They had become pillars of sacrifice, the foundation for the cut. Warhammers fired everything they had left. Broadsides shook with heat, barrels melted, but still they fired, still they carved scars across Dirge's frame. Zephyr flickered in and out, its hull breaking, its crew bleeding, but still it stitched roads, still it marked throats, still it fed wounds into fire control boards. Isabella's spear cut the flank, Arclight's chains detonating throats, Tempest's storm swallowing escorts. Her fleets moved like blades, each strike timed to by seconds. Tudor's marines launched one last time. Dropships streaked into relay clusters, their hulls burning, their squads fighting through corridors alive with resonance. Charges planted, detonations ripping through amplification throats. Relays collapsed, harmonics shattered. The song dimmed, dirge faltered. The severing note rose. On Sentinel, the harmonic engine roared. The chord sharpened into a single, blinding note. Senna screamed with it, her voice breaking, her hum fused into the machine until she could no longer be told apart from it. The weapon fired. The anchors carried the note into the tether. The bridge lit with white fire, resonance folding in on itself, harmonics collapsing. The wound between worlds shuddered, the abyss recoiled. Dirge screamed, its thousand throats cracking, its song breaking into fragments. Harriers scattered, relays imploded, the citadel itself trembled. The tether brightened into brilliance, then snapped shut. In the abyss, silence fell. Dirge shuddered, its frame splitting, its harmonics unraveling. Its throats burst one by one, its voice collapsing into nothing. The Harriers folded apart, wings disintegrating. Relay ships imploded, their ribs collapsing inward. The abyss recoiled, its currents twisting, its scaffolds shattering. The fleets surged forward, convoys rushing through the hinge as it closed. Zephyr darted ahead, stitching one last road, its hull splitting, its crew whispering names. Isabella's spear carved a path, Arclight and Tempest firing their last, their hulls burning. Warhammers fired until nothing remained, their barrels melted, their decks aflame. The bastions held, their shields blazing, their cores collapsing, their crews already gone. They held until the tether cut them apart. The Razee II crossed last. Rivers stood at the rail, his eyes locked on the hinge as it closed, his jaw set, his voice steady. Every ship that had made it through was alive because others had not. On Sentinel, the chamber collapsed. The harmonic cores shattered, the engine cracked into silence, crystal supports crumbling. Illyrian scientists fell to their knees, their ears bleeding, their eyes blinded by light. Senna lay at the heart of it, her body still, her hum spent. The weapon had sung. The wound was closed. In the void above Sentinel, the fleets that remained emerged battered, scarred, broken, but alive. The abyss was gone. The rift was sealed. The Watchers were imprisoned forever in silence. Silence hung where once the abyss had roared. The fleets that survived drifted into real space, battered, scarred, their hulls blackened, their decks burned. Engines sputtered, shields were gone, hangar bays stood empty. Yet they lived. Around them the stars of familiar skies gleamed, cold, distant, but real. The abyss was behind them, its wound sealed. No more songs pressed against their minds, no more resonance clawed at their bones. For the first time in years, silence was only silence. The Razee 2 floated at the heart of the formation, its ribs scorched but intact. Inside the strategium, Rivers stood at the rail, his shoulders heavy but unbowed. Reports scrolled past in grim lists, casualty rolls thicker than the names of the living. Every bastion but one was gone. Warhammers reduced to half strength. Carriers gutted, convoys shattered. Entire marine squads lost in the void. The lost fleet diminished, the Gemini fleet scarred, allies bloodied. Isabella's spear drifted nearby, her fleets gathered like a wounded animal curled tight. Arclight and Tempest still stood, but their frames bore scars that would never heal. Zephyr was gone, lost in the final stitching, its crew carried into silence. Tudor's marines were fewer than ever, their racks half empty, but those who remained stood straight, their eyes clear. They had fought the abyss and returned. The council convened in Hollow one last time. Their faces bore the marks of exhaustion, grief, and relief all mingled into one. Torque's voice rumbled low, his people mourning the bastions they had built and the crews who had given everything. The Tartans bowed their heads, their loss immense, their pride unbroken. The Solarians spoke little, their silence a mark of respect. Senna's place was empty. Her voice would never hum through the channels again. Yet every soul who lived knew her lullabies had steadied them, her song had sealed the wound, her sacrifice had bought their survival. Her name was the first spoken in remembrance, carried across the comms, answered by every ship with a chorus of acknowledgement. Stephen leaned against the conduit, his body frail, his eyes dim, but his voice steady. It is done. The rift is sealed. The abyss cannot reach us again. He said no more, for no words could carry the weight of what had been given to reach this moment. Rivers let the silence linger. Then he spoke, his voice low, each word carrying like steel across the fleets. They had not won by destroying the abyss. They had not slain every choir or silenced every throat. They had endured. They had chosen to close the wound, to cage the silence forever. The cost was written in the names of the dead, but the living bore their legacy. The alliance still stood. Isabella's image steadied at his side. Her eyes shone with grief and pride, her voice soft but clear. They had brought their people home. They had carved a path through the abyss and sealed it shut. They had done what no fleet had ever done before. The future was theirs again, not stolen by silence. Rivers looked at her, and for a heartbeat the weight lifted. In her eyes he saw not just command but memory, Naval Academy summers, laughter before war, the motherly steel that had carried the lost fleet. They had survived together. The spark that lingered between them was small, but it was enough. A promise for what might come after war. The fleets drifted toward Sentinel, their scars carried like banners. In the chambers below, the shattered harmonic engine lay in ruins, its crystals cracked, its cores silent. It would never fire again, nor would it need to. The abyss was sealed. The Watchers imprisoned forever. The Razee 2's decks were quiet. Crews rested where they could, their bodies broken but their spirits intact. Marines sat in silence, remembering the names of those who had not returned. Engineers pressed their hands to blackened bulkheads, whispering thanks to ships that had carried them through. Pilots stared into the stars, their eyes red, their hands still trembling. And through it all, silence reigned. True silence. Not the silence of the abyss, not the crushing void of resonance, but the silence of peace. The war was over. Subscribe for what happens next with Buck Rivers and Isabella in the Razee Saga.